I got a call from my neighbor about a moving truck at my house while I was at work. I came home to find my parents and brother moving his family into my house without permission. You don't need that much space anyway, they said. So I called the police. This happened 8 months ago, and I'm finally ready to share the whole story. I'm 29 male, work in commercial construction management, and this is hands down the most insane family drama I've ever experienced. Sorry for the length, but this gets absolutely wild and the ending is worth it. Some background about my family dynamics. I'm the older of two sons. My brother David is 26 and has been the golden child his entire life despite being a complete disaster. Dropped out of college twice, can't hold a job for more than 6 months, got his girlfriend Crystal pregnant at 24, and they've been leeching off our parents ever since. Meanwhile, I worked construction through high school, got my project management certification, and worked my way up to making $125,000 annually managing commercial building projects. 3 years ago, I bought a house. Not just any house, a 2,600 square foot renovated Craftsman in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in our city. I put down $75,000 cash that I'd saved working 60-hour weeks and living like a monk for 4 years. The place needed work, but I spent 2 years doing renovations myself during weekends and evenings. The kitchen renovation alone took 6 months of weekends. I gutted everything down to the studs, installed custom cabinets I built myself, and topped it all with granite countertops. The basement transformation was my masterpiece. What had been a dingy, unfinished space became a proper entertainment area with a wet bar, custom seating, and a home theater system with surround sound speakers I wired myself. The master bathroom took 3 months of careful planning. I completely reconfigured the layout, added a walk-in shower with custom herringbone tile work, positioned a soaking tub to catch natural light, and installed heated floors with a double vanity. The original hardwood floors needed complete refinishing. I spent a full month of evenings stripping, sanding, staining, and sealing every square foot myself. I updated the electrical system to modern code and upgraded all the plumbing. The landscaping was a 2-year project. I removed overgrown shrubs, planted trees strategically for privacy, installed an irrigation system, and created garden beds with perennial plants. I built the back deck myself using composite materials. Every nail, every tile, every drop of sweat equity was mine. The house sits on a quarter-acre lot with mature oak trees, a 2-car garage, and a workshop where I restore classic cars. Property values have increased 30% since I bought it. It's not just a house, it's my sanctuary, my investment, and proof of everything I've worked for. My parents, Richard and Linda, have always had opinions about everyone else's life choices. Mom thinks her sons exist to fulfill her vision of family. She posts inspirational quotes about family on Facebook while trying to control every aspect of her children's lives. Dad just goes along with whatever she says to avoid conflict. David and Crystal live in my parents' basement with their 2 kids. David works sporadically. Delivery driver, warehouse temp. Currently unemployed again after getting fired for showing up late. Crystal has never held a job, spending her days making TikTok videos about her struggle, while my parents provide free housing, utilities, food, and babysitting. The family dynamic has always been David gets endless chances while I'm expected to have my life together and help everyone else. When David crashed his car at 22, my parents bought him another one. When he got arrested for shoplifting, they paid for his lawyer. When Crystal got pregnant, they threw a baby shower and set up a nursery. When I graduated college, I got a handshake. About 6 months ago, my family started making weird comments about my house during our monthly family dinners. It's so big for just one person. You rattling around in all that space. Must be lonely in such a big place. David's family is really outgrowing the basement. I'd just laugh it off and change the subject because, honestly, what else was I supposed to say? That I enjoyed having space? That I'd earned it? Then the comments got more pointed and frequent. You should really think about downsizing. A nice apartment downtown would be so convenient for you. David needs to consider the children's future. Real estate is such a good investment. You could probably make money selling. The classic guilt trip routine that my mother has perfected over decades of manipulating her family. I should mention that while I make good money, I'm not careless with it. My mortgage payment is $2,950 per month, including taxes and insurance, which is totally manageable on my salary. I've got $45,000 in savings, I max out my retirement contributions, and I still have plenty left over for my hobbies: woodworking, mountain biking, and restoring classic cars. I drive a paid-off truck, I cook most of my meals at home, and I'm careful with my spending. I earned every dollar through hard work and smart decisions, not luck or handouts. The situation escalated about a month ago during what I thought was a normal family dinner. David was complaining about their living situation, how cramped they were in the basement, how the kids needed their own rooms, how Crystal was getting depressed being stuck downstairs all the time. My mom was making sympathetic noises and shooting meaningful looks at me across the table. Finally, she came out with it. You know, Alex, you have all that space going unused. Those guest bedrooms just sitting empty most of the time. They're not guest bedrooms, I corrected. One's my home office, the other's my workshop storage. But you could easily combine those functions into one room, she continued. Really, it's almost wasteful to have so much space for just one person. I could see where this was going. Mom, let's not do this. Do what? I'm just saying that family helps family. David's in a tough spot right now. David's been in a tough spot for 6 years. Maybe it's time he figured it out himself. That's when Crystal chimed in. It's easy for you to say. You don't have kids to worry about. Some of us have responsibilities. I looked at her, this woman who'd never held a job in her life, lecturing me about responsibility. Crystal, I have responsibilities too, like the mortgage I pay every month on the house I bought. But you don't need all that space, David said. It's not like you're using it. How do you know what I use it for? Come on, man. You've got like 4 bedrooms and you sleep in one. That's 3 empty bedrooms while my kids are sharing a basement room with no windows. Then get your own place. The table went quiet. My dad cleared his throat. Son, maybe we could work something out. Some kind of arrangement that helps everyone. What kind of arrangement? My mom leaned forward, and I could see she'd been planning this conversation. Well, what if David's family moved into your place? Just temporarily. You could get a nice apartment downtown, close to work, no maintenance hassles, and David could take over the house payments. I actually laughed. Are you serious? David can't even hold a job for 6 months, and you want him to take over a $3,000 mortgage? He'd grow into it, my mom said. Having that responsibility might be exactly what he needs to get his life together. And what happens when he can't make the payments? Because we all know he can't make the payments. That's a pretty negative attitude, Crystal said. Maybe if people believed in David more, he'd do better. I've believed in David for 26 years. At some point, belief needs to be backed up by actions. The conversation devolved from there, with my family making increasingly ridiculous arguments about how this arrangement would benefit everyone, especially me. According to them, I'd save money, have less responsibility, be closer to work, and best of all, I'd be helping family. It was a win-win-win situation that only a selfish person would refuse. I left dinner early that night, but I thought that was the end of it. My family has always been big on dramatic conversations that fizzle out when reality sets in. I figured they'd realize how impossible their plan was and move on to something else. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I was reviewing project blueprints in my home office when I got a text from my mom, coming by around 2 p.m. to measure the guest bedrooms. David wants to see if his furniture will fit. I called her immediately. Mom, what are you talking about? Why would David's furniture need to fit in my guest rooms? Oh, sweetie, we've been discussing this more since Sunday. David's lease is up next month, and his landlord is raising the rent to an impossible amount. We thought you could move into that nice apartment complex downtown, and David could take over the house payments. It really is the perfect solution. I felt like I was in an alternate reality. This is my house. I bought it. I renovated it. I pay for it. Well, yes, but you don't really need all that space. And David has children to think about. You're being selfish keeping all that room to yourself when your brother's family is cramped in a basement. Selfish. For wanting to live in the house I bought with my own money. Mom, we're not having this conversation. David can figure out his own housing situation like every other adult in America. She got that icy tone she uses when she's not getting her way. Alex, we've given this considerable thought and discussed it extensively. It's the right thing to do for the family. David can probably take over your mortgage payments. It'll actually save you money in the long run. Take over my payments? The guy who's been unemployed for 3 months and has never paid for anything more expensive than a cell phone bill? The answer is no. End of discussion. Don't be hasty. At least think about it overnight. We'll come by tomorrow to take some measurements and look at the logistics. No, you won't. Don't come by. Don't measure anything. The answer is no. It will always be no. And if you show up at my house without permission, I'll call the police. She hung up on me. That should have been the end of it. But my family has never been good at accepting no for an answer, especially when they've convinced themselves they're entitled to something. 2 weeks later, I was on a job site about 40 minutes from home, overseeing the installation of HVAC systems in a new office building, when I got a call from my elderly neighbor across the street. She's this sweet woman who's lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and keeps an eye on things for everyone. Alex, dear, I hope I'm not bothering you at work, but there's a moving truck at your house and people carrying furniture inside. I thought you might want to know since your car isn't in the driveway. My blood turned to ice. What kind of people? Well, it looks like your parents and that young man who visits sometimes. And there's a pregnant woman directing where they should put things. I assumed you knew about it, but then I realized you might not since you're not there. I was in my truck and driving home before she finished the sentence. I called my site supervisor and told him there was a family emergency, then drove like my life depended on it, weaving through traffic and running yellow lights. When I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A U-Haul truck was backed up to my front door. My parents' car was there. David's beat-up Honda was there. And there were people moving furniture, baby cribs, a ratty couch, boxes of clothes, even a refrigerator, into my house. I sat in my truck for 30 seconds, trying to process the absolute audacity. They were actually trying to move David's family into my house, without asking, without permission, without any legal right whatsoever. Like I didn't exist. Like my ownership meant nothing. Like they could just decide to redistribute my property because they felt like it. I got out and walked straight to my front door, which was propped open with a box. The scene inside was even worse than I'd imagined. David was carrying a mattress up my stairs, grunting with effort and sweating through his shirt. Crystal was sitting on my leather couch, the one I'd saved for 6 months to buy, while her 2 kids ran around getting their sticky hands on everything. My mom was standing in the middle of it all with a clipboard and measuring tape, directing the operation like some kind of demented moving coordinator. What the heck is going on here? I said loud enough that everyone stopped what they were doing. My mom turned around with this fake surprised expression, like she'd been caught organizing a surprise party instead of committing a felony. Alex, you're home early. We wanted to get David settled before you got back, so it wouldn't be such a disruption for you. Settled? Get out. All of you. Right now. David had stopped halfway up the stairs with the mattress, his face red from exertion. Dude, relax. Mom explained everything to us. This works out better for everyone. You get to downsize, we get the space we need, everyone wins. Did she explain how you're going to make a $2,950 mortgage payment on your $0 salary? Crystal looked up from her phone for the first time since I'd arrived. Actually, we talked to someone at the social services office about government assistance programs for housing. With David's income level and the kids, we can probably get help with the payments. Plus, there are tax benefits for families. I stared at her. This woman who had never contributed a dime to society, casually discussing how to put my house on government assistance. You want to put my house on welfare? It's not like that, my mom jumped in, setting down her clipboard. David would be taking over the financial responsibilities, and if he needs a little help from available programs, that's what they're for. It's actually very responsible planning. Programs are for people who buy houses they can afford, not for people who steal houses from their brothers. Nobody's stealing anything. My dad finally spoke up from where he was stacking boxes in my hallway. This is just a family arrangement. You'll save money living downtown. David gets space for his kids. Your mother and I get to see our grandchildren in a proper home. Everyone benefits. Everyone benefits except me, who loses the house I bought and renovated myself. Did any of you think to ask me before moving someone into my house? We knew you'd be difficult about it, my mom said matter-of-factly. That's why we wanted to present it as a done deal. Once you see how well it works out, you'll understand that we were right. How did you even get in? I never gave anyone permission to enter my house. David held up a key, dangling it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mom had a spare maid when she house sat for you last year. Remember when you went to Colorado for that wedding? Last year when I went to Colorado for my friend's bachelor party. She'd offered to check on the place and water my plants, and I gave her a key for the weekend. I never got it back, and when I asked about it, she said she'd lost it. She'd been lying for over a year. You've been planning this, I said, the pieces falling into place. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. Who are you calling? My mom demanded, her voice rising an octave. The police. To report a break-in and theft in progress. Alex, put that phone down. We're family. You can't call the police on family. Family doesn't break into each other's houses and try to steal them. The 911 operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a break and enter in progress. People have moved furniture into my house without permission and are refusing to leave. The police arrived a few minutes later. 2 officers, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else when they realized it was a domestic situation. After reviewing my documentation and confirming I owned the house, they ordered my family to remove everything and leave. I changed my locks that same night and installed a security system. But this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to 38 text messages from various family members and family friends. Apparently, my mom had spent the entire night calling everyone she knew to tell them what a heartless son I was, spinning the story to make me look like the villain. But the absolute peak of their delusion came the following Saturday, when they staged an intervention in my driveway. My parents, David's entire family, plus my aunt and uncle, and my mom's pastor from her church. 8 adults standing in my driveway like they were about to perform some kind of exorcism. The sight was almost comical if it weren't so infuriating. They'd clearly coordinated this ambush, probably spending hours planning their approach and dividing up talking points. My mom stood in the center like a general commanding troops, while my aunt held a folder of what looked like printed articles, probably about family obligation and housing assistance programs. The pastor wore his most serious expression, the one he probably reserved for addressing serious sins from the pulpit. "Alex," my mom said in her most serious voice, "we need to have a family meeting." "No, we don't. Get off my property before I call the police again." "Son," the pastor said, stepping forward with his hands clasped in front of him, like he was delivering a sermon. "I understand there's been some conflict in your family. Your mother asked me to speak with you about the importance of family unity and Christian charity." I looked at my mom in disbelief. "You brought your pastor to guilt-trip me into giving away my house?" The pastor continued in that earnest tone that religious people use when they think they're saving your soul. "The Bible teaches us to care for our family, especially children in need. Matthew tells us that whatever we do for the least of these, we do for Christ himself. The Bible also teaches that if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. David's 26 years old with 2 kids and he's unemployed by choice. Maybe start there, Pastor." My aunt stepped forward, trying to take a more emotional approach. She was holding what appeared to be printouts from websites about family financial planning and multi-generational housing arrangements. "Alex, sweetie, we've all helped family over the years. When you needed help in college, I worked 3 jobs in college and graduated debt-free. When you needed a place to stay after graduation, I lived in a 400-square-foot studio apartment and saved every penny for 2 years." My uncle tried a different angle, the man-to-man approach that older men always think will work on younger ones. "Look, son, I get it. You worked hard for what you have. Nobody's taking that away from you. But David's got kids to think about. Family responsibility. You'll understand when you have children someday. If I have kids someday, I'll plan for them and provide for them myself, like a responsible adult. I won't expect my brother to give up his house to make room for my poor decisions." Crystal was standing behind David holding their youngest, giving me a look like I'd personally ruined her life. The baby was fussing in the heat, and she was clearly uncomfortable being pregnant and standing in my driveway for this ridiculous confrontation. "This is exactly why you can't keep a girlfriend," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're selfish and cold. No woman wants a man who won't help his own family." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. "Crystal, you're 24 years old with 2 kids, no job, no education, no skills, and you're living in your boyfriend's parents' basement. Maybe don't give relationship advice." "Hey!" David stepped forward, finally showing some backbone. "Don't talk to her like that. Then tell her to keep her mouth shut about things she doesn't understand." My mom tried to regain control of the intervention, clearly frustrated that their carefully planned ambush was falling apart. "Alex, we've talked to someone with legal expertise about this situation. There may be options for family property arrangements that you haven't considered." This was new information, and it sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of legal options?" A family law attorney from our church congregation explained that in some cases, family property can be subject to family necessity arrangements, especially when children are involved, and there are significant disparities in family wealth and living situations. I stared at them, realizing they actually thought they could sue their way into my house. They'd actually consulted someone about legal ways to force me to give up my property. Did this church attorney also explain that I'm 29 years old and you have 0 legal claim to my property? Did he mention that what you attempted was breaking and entering? Did he explain the difference between wishful thinking and actual law? When your father and I are old and need help, don't come crying to us for support, my mom said, playing her final card. "Deal," I said without hesitation. That stunned her. She expected me to back down, to choose potential future guilt over present-day boundaries. They all left, leaving me feeling both victorious and sad, but this wasn't over. My family doesn't give up easily, especially when they're desperate. And I was starting to suspect there was more to their desperation than just David needing more space. I decided to investigate, and what I found changed everything. Public records in our state are mostly available online if you know where to look and what to search for. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon diving deep into county records, court filings, and property databases. It took me about 6 hours of methodical searching to piece together the full picture, and when I did, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The first red flag was a second mortgage filing I found buried in the property records. My parents were in foreclosure proceedings. According to the county records, they'd taken out a second mortgage on their house 2 years ago for $90,000. The paperwork showed they'd claimed it was for home improvements and debt consolidation, but I could see from the timing that it coincided with when David and Crystal had moved in. Then last year, they'd taken out a home equity line of credit for another $45,000, maxing out their borrowing capacity. They owed almost $220,000 on a house worth maybe $180,000 in the current market. They were completely underwater. But the real shock was the foreclosure notice dated 7 weeks ago. They were 4 months behind on payments, and the bank was moving to repossess. They had until the end of next month to bring the account current or lose the house. The total amount needed to cure the default was over $18,000, money they clearly didn't have. Now their desperation made perfect sense. They weren't just trying to help David, they were trying to save themselves. If David took over my mortgage payments, they could use the money they'd been spending supporting him and his family to catch up on their own house payments. It was a desperate attempt to rob Peter to pay Paul, with me as the unwilling victim. But where had all that money gone? $135,000 in loans over 2 years was serious cash for people on a fixed income. I kept digging through business registration records and found the smoking gun. 18 months ago, my dad had registered an LLC called Morrison Family Investments. According to the filings, it was supposed to be a house flipping business. The paperwork showed grand plans for buying, renovating, and reselling properties for profit during what they saw as a red-hot real estate market. More research revealed the full extent of their financial disaster. Morrison Family Investments had purchased 2 properties using the borrowed money from their house. The first was a 1960s ranch house they bought for $98,000, intending to flip it for $150,000 after renovations. Instead, they got in over their heads with structural problems they hadn't anticipated, contractor issues, and permit delays. The house sat on the market for 8 months before finally selling for $63,000, a $35,000 loss plus carrying costs, taxes, and renovation expenses. The second property was even worse. They'd bought a foreclosed duplex for $110,000, planning to renovate and rent it out for steady income. But they'd underestimated the extent of the damage and the cost of bringing it up to rental code standards. When they couldn't complete the renovations or make the payments, that property went into foreclosure too. It was eventually sold at auction for $75,000, meaning they lost about $35,000 on that deal as well, not counting the money they'd poured into attempted repairs. My parents had blown their retirement savings and leveraged their house to the maximum, trying to become real estate moguls during the pandemic boom. They'd watched HGTV shows and thought it looked easy, completely ignoring the risks and complexities involved in property investment. And now they were about to lose everything. But the financial disaster went even deeper than I initially thought when I started digging into David and Crystal's situation. David had filed for bankruptcy 18 months ago. Chapter 7. Complete discharge of all debts including $28,000 in credit cards and a defaulted car loan. That explained why he couldn't qualify for his own mortgage. Crystal had multiple collection agencies after her for unpaid medical bills, store credit cards, and something called quick cash loans for $4,200 at an astronomical interest rate. My perfect judgmental family was completely broke. Not just broke, financially destroyed. And they'd been hiding it from me while lecturing me about family responsibility. Suddenly, their plan made perfect sense. Get me out of my house, move David's family in, use the money they'd save on supporting David to catch up on their mortgage payments. They probably figured once I was paying rent downtown instead of building equity, I'd be more willing to help them out financially on a regular basis. I called my lawyer and told him what I'd found. Alex, you need to be very careful here. Desperate people do desperate things, but you also have them completely documented if they try anything else. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to protect myself from my family's schemes. I was going to make sure they faced the consequences of their choices and learned that actions have real results. Over the next week, I put together a comprehensive file on their financial situation. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence of their desperation and poor decisions. I organized it all in a 3-ring binder with tabs and photocopies of everything. Their foreclosure papers, David's bankruptcy filing, Crystal's collection notices, the failed business registration documents, tax liens, court judgments, everything that painted the picture of a family in complete financial freefall who thought they could solve their problems by stealing from me. Then I started making some very strategic phone calls, each one carefully planned for maximum impact. First, I contacted their mortgage company and the bank handling their foreclosure. I sent a detailed letter explaining the attempted fraud, including documentation of David's unauthorized calls to my mortgage company, claiming to be my representative, evidence of their attempts to manipulate me into transferring my property to help them avoid foreclosure, and records of their business failures that had led to their current situation. I explained that they had used a stolen key to break into my house and attempt to move David's family in without permission, all as part of a scheme to use my mortgage payments to save their own house. The letter was professional but thorough, laying out exactly how they'd attempted to commit fraud and how their actions demonstrated they were not operating in good faith with their lender. I included copies of the police report from when I'd had them removed from my house, documentation of David's bankruptcy that should have been reported to the court, and evidence of their deliberate deception about their financial situation. 3 days later, I got a call from a fraud investigator at the bank asking me to come in and give a formal statement to their legal team. Apparently, attempting to fraudulently transfer property to avoid foreclosure was something they took very seriously, especially when it involved lying to multiple financial institutions. Second, I called the bankruptcy court clerk's office and spoke to someone in the trustee's office about David's case. David's Chapter 7 discharge had included a requirement to report any significant changes in his financial situation for 3 years after filing. Attempting to take over a house payment definitely counted as a significant change that should have been reported to the court. The fact that he'd been calling my mortgage company and investigating loan assumptions without reporting this to the bankruptcy court was a violation of his discharge agreement. I provided them with documentation of David's calls to my mortgage company, evidence of his attempts to take over my house payments, and records showing he'd been planning this for weeks without proper disclosure. The clerk informed me that bankruptcy fraud was a federal crime, and that they would be reopening his case for review. Third, I may have mentioned to a few people in the community that David was looking for work and seemed really desperate for money, to the point where his family was making some questionable decisions. Word travels fast in small towns, and reputation matters when you're job hunting. I wasn't spreading lies. Everything I mentioned was completely true, but I made sure the right people heard about his character and reliability issues. I spoke to the manager at the hardware store where David had applied for work, mentioning that I'd heard he was having some legal troubles related to bankruptcy fraud. I talked to my neighbor who worked at the auto parts store, casually mentioning that my brother was struggling with some honesty issues and making poor decisions that affected his family. Nothing malicious, just concerned family members sharing factual information about someone's character. But the most satisfying call was to my mom's church. I spoke to the church secretary and mentioned that some longtime members of the congregation were facing serious financial difficulties and had been making some questionable decisions lately. I suggested they might benefit from financial counseling and perhaps some assistance from the church's emergency fund, and provided names and details about their situation. I explained that my parents had been involved in some concerning behavior, including attempted property fraud and breaking into family members' homes. I mentioned that they'd been lying to church members about their financial situation while asking for help with legal fees. I suggested that the church might want to look into the situation more carefully before providing any assistance, since there seemed to be some dishonesty involved in how they were presenting their circumstances. The secretary thanked me for the information and said they would definitely be following up with the family to better understand their situation and provide appropriate guidance. Within 2 weeks, the consequences started rolling in like dominoes. My parents' foreclosure was accelerated due to the fraud investigation. They went from having a month to save their house to having 2 weeks to vacate. David's bankruptcy case was reopened for review based on his attempted assumption of debt that he'd never reported to the court. The church started asking uncomfortable questions about my parents' financial situation, their business dealings, and their attempts to involve the pastor in what was essentially a property dispute. Several potential employers in town started asking questions about David's background and reliability after hearing concerns about his character from community members. 3 weeks after I'd started my research and documentation campaign, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was small and defeated. "Alex." It was barely above a whisper. "Hi, Mom. We need to talk to you. Can you come over, please? I'm pretty busy these days. Please, it's important. It's urgent." I drove over that evening to find their house in complete chaos. Moving boxes everywhere, Crystal crying on the couch while the kids ran around confused, David frantically loading stuff into his Honda like the house was on fire. What's going on? I asked, though I already knew exactly what was happening. My dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. We lost the house, son. Final foreclosure went through yesterday. We have 48 hours to get everything out. That's unfortunate. Where are you planning to go? That's what we wanted to talk to you about. My mom stepped forward, all the fight and superiority completely gone from her demeanor. Alex, we know we made mistakes. We know we handled things badly with your house. But we're family and we need help. What kind of help are you looking for? David stopped loading boxes and turned around, sweat dripping down his face. Dude, we're in serious trouble. Lost the house. The bankruptcy thing got reopened somehow. Crystal's mom won't let us stay there anymore because of some collection agency calling. We've got nowhere to go. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're all adults. Alex, my dad said quietly, his voice shaking. We were wondering, maybe we could stay with you? Just temporarily, until we get back on our feet. I stared at him. Stay with me? In the house you tried to steal from me? We're family, Crystal said through her tears. You have to help us. That's what family does. Actually, I don't have to do anything. David stepped forward, looking defeated. Come on, man. What do you want us to do? Live under a bridge? Sleep in our cars? The kids don't have anywhere to go. I honestly don't care what you do. You created this mess? You can figure out how to get out of it. My mom tried one more time, her voice breaking. Alex, I know we hurt you. I know we made terrible mistakes. But we're sorry. We're really, truly sorry. And we need you. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry your plan failed. You're sorry you're facing consequences. But you're not sorry you tried to steal from me. I looked around at all of them. Desperate, broke, homeless, and finally understanding that their actions had real consequences. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to clean up the mess you made. You're going to find jobs, real jobs that you actually show up for. You're going to find apartments you can actually afford. You're going to stop expecting other people to bail you out of your bad decisions. And if we don't, David asked, then you'll be homeless, which honestly sounds like a problem you created for yourselves. My dad made one last desperate attempt. Son, please. We made mistakes, but we're still your family. No, I said, heading for the door. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. You guys are just people I happen to share DNA with who turned out to be criminals. Alex, my mom called after me, her voice cracking completely. You can't just abandon us. I turned around one final time. Watch me. That was 8 months ago. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I've heard bits and pieces about what happened to them since then. My parents moved into a one-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town, and both got jobs at a discount grocery store. They work opposite shifts, so one of them can always be home with David's kids, since David and Crystal can't afford childcare. David and Crystal moved in with her sister, in a double-wide trailer in a mobile home park outside the city limits. David finally got a steady job working at an auto parts store, but it's minimum wage and they're barely scraping by. Crystal got a job at a fast food restaurant. They're all struggling financially, working jobs they hate, living in places they can't stand, dealing with the stress of poverty, and the shame of their fall from middle-class respectability. Exactly the kind of life they were trying to avoid by stealing my house. Meanwhile, I'm still living in my beautiful house that I bought and renovated myself. I got promoted to senior project manager last month with a $15,000 raise. I'm dating someone incredible, a woman who owns her own accounting firm, has her own house, and has zero interest in anyone else's property or money.